build a better future. We're trying to invest in founders that are generational founders that basically will be around longer than I'll be around. But they're actually importantly creating jobs and productivity and efficiency uplift for my kids and the kids of my kids, jobs for them. That's the way we look at it. It's about leaving that legacy in the future.
Hi everyone, I'm your host Rohit Bhargava, and you are listening to episode 193 of the Startup Playbook podcast, a weekly series where I sit down with successful tech founders, investors, and operators to unpack their journey, lessons, and insights to help current and future entrepreneurs. The voice that you heard a little bit earlier was that of our guest for this episode, Llew Jury. Llew is a general partner and executive chairman of Sprint Ventures, a Queensland-based venture capital fund. Prior to this, he ran a number of successful businesses, including the Reload Group, which is one of Australia's largest digital and e-commerce marketing agencies. He grew that business to 90 staff and over 300 clients before eventually selling to Hardie Media in 2022. We covered a wide range of topics in this interview, including the common mistakes that founders make when it comes to sales and marketing, how to leverage partners for growth, how to build relationships and networks in your industry, and much more. Before we get into this interview though, just a very quick reminder that on the 13th of August, we will be doing an in-person event in Melbourne to celebrate 8 years of the podcast and to do a live podcast interview with Lee Jasper, the former co-founder and CEO of Aconex, which sold for $1.6 billion. It's going to be a great event and I hope to see many of you there. I'll make sure to add a link to the registration page into the show notes for this episode. Without further ado, here is my interview with Llew Jury. Hi Llew, welcome to the Startup Playbook podcast and thanks so much for taking the time to be on the show today.
Thank you, Rohit. It's great to be here.
Llew, obviously we've known each other for a little while, but for those people that may not be as familiar with you and your background, do you want to share a little bit about your story and what got you here today?
There's lots of stories, Rohit. So I'm a VC investor right now, and I am the general partner and founder of Sprint Ventures. Sprint is an early stage investment company, a venture capital company based in Brisbane, and we've got 2 funds and 18 portfolio companies, and we're raising our 3rd fund right now. My background in venture, you either come from the entrepreneurial background as a founder, which is where I've come from, or you come from investment banking. I've come from the former, and I have done 2 exits. So I set up my first foray into the tech scene was in the late 90s, before the dot-com crash, and I set up a company called Alfresco, which my brother and I set up, and we then exited that company in 2006 to a consortium led by the STW Group, which was part of John Siglin's group of companies. And then I set up an SEO company, one of the first SEO companies and digital marketing agencies in Australia that really focused on the digital marketing aspects of content and Google AdWords and Facebook advertising in the late noughties and then into the last decade. So I had that company and I sold that 2 years ago, and that company had nearly 100 staff in 4 countries. And I then decided to do my 3rd sprint, hence the name Sprint Ventures, and invest in great founders and generational companies that are building a better future.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, so many parts of your story that I want to dig into, but I think one of the interesting things is just like little parallels between our stories, obviously being much more successful than I have. But one of the things that stood out to me when we first spoke is that we actually both went to the same high school and uni as well.
We did. Small world.
Curious about small world. There's not a lot of people that come from Canberra, but curious about what your experience in Canberra was like and how that shaped your perspective on things.
It certainly did. And that's a really good question. I think Canberra is a wonderful place to go to and to visit if you're around government and the services and supply chain and defence and it's a great place to actually. I think it's a uni town. It's a wonderful uni town. I went to Canberra Grammar for my last part of schooling. I moved there when I was 14, and then I went to the ANU, and I think it's a wonderful uni town. I think it's a fantastic grounding actually in politics, in how to deal with the sons of prime ministers and ministers and getting to know people at the highest levels. I think though that Canberra is a government town first and foremost, and that's what it was built for. 75% of people in Canberra are actually employed around and within the public service, which is fantastic for Canberra. But I just felt in the late 90s that I was an outlier in terms of being an entrepreneur. I wanted to build things. Like us all, Rohit, we want to build and we want to create and we need access to talent. And a lot of the great talent are in now the highest levels of the public service. And a lot of my friends are still there. But I thought I probably had to move from Canberra, and I worked a bit out of Sydney for an IT company for about a year after I finished at the ANU. And then I decided to move up to Queensland, to Brisbane, because I just thought there was a massive opportunity in Brisbane and Queensland in the late 90s. And I could just see everything that's now happened and what we see Brisbane 25 years later. I could actually see that there was a tremendous opportunity for infrastructure, for human capital, and for building great businesses. So that's the reason why. But I've got a lot of great affinity for Canberra.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, Canberra is very much a government city. A large proportion of people work in the public service as well. So there's a very, I guess, well-trodden path in terms of where people head to after university in particular. I think it's really interesting as well seeing people that well-trodden path kind of forces some people to jump into the complete opposite direction as well. And so someone I spoke to was Kylie Merritt, who is one of your portfolio founders, also a friend of yours from high school. And one of the things that she mentioned was that in your group of friends, you were the first person to jump out and start your own thing, which she said that she really respected and also thought was like absolutely mad at the same time. I
got that comment. I got that comment a bit.
Yeah. I think I've mentioned on the podcast before that my friends held an intervention for me when I quit my first job to launch my first startup 12 years ago. But what was that push for you, and what did that look like? Because obviously, as you mentioned in the 90s, like a very different world and ecosystem to what it's like now. What was that catalyst for you?
Yeah, it was the pre-.com, as I said. It was in the late 90s and tech was just really starting to take off. And I think that I just wanted to be part of it. The internet was that generational game changer. And I think that what I did there was really make sure that I was going to be part of something within it. I didn't know what exactly it was, but I thought that there was a great opportunity to really build and create something that was going to be generational. That was the main reason for doing it.
And what did that look like in terms of launching your first business, the web design agency? Why that particular business?
I think that the key thing was that my brother and I were building websites in Canberra, and we thought back then websites were really an early incarnation of what you could actually do. You could actually build some websites that would grow businesses and help businesses succeed. Yeah, we decided to do that as the first program.
And obviously you mentioned you decided to sell that company in, I believe it was 2006. What did that acquisition process look like? And was it a difficult decision to sell at that point?
It was a good decision to sell. Building a company and building a web design company and building any IT company is being a bit like being on the treadmill. And as you said, people like Kylie looked at that as you're a bit mad when you start to go onto that journey. We did 7 years and 7 years was enough. And I think, you start to build a family, you start to get other things happening. And I think you've got to actually build organizations that are about lifestyle. And one of the key things that I thought was I always want to build a family business, and I want to build a business that puts family first and puts the people around me first. And having a web design agency back in the early 2000s, you had to really, I suppose, make sure that you did it in a way that was sustainable. And even today, I probably wouldn't set up, my biggest learning is I wouldn't set up a web design agency again. I in those 7 years from 99 to 2006, I learned a lot. I learned how to manage people. I learned a lot about myself. I learned about how to run sustainable cash flow within the business. And I learned about growth, most importantly, and growth of the business, sustainable growth. And building a web company is you're always on. As I said, you're on this treadmill. And the only way to get off the treadmill is actually to sell the agency. And so the process of selling was quite good, that we identified a company and we actually emailed the CEO. We guessed his email address and said a simple email. He was called Arthur. We said, Arthur, we have something that you might want. And he, about a week later, rang back, and my brother and I then went through the process and exited the sale. It took about 3 months, and that was to a Melbourne company. And that process was excellent in terms of learning about not only building companies, but actually doing the exit. And you actually set up organizations, you set up businesses for both succession planning, but also for exit. So that was a 7-year window. That was 99 to 2006. And that just showed me a huge amount of different areas, different learnings that I knew that I could then take into the following businesses.
Yeah, and so much I want to dig into. I guess maybe as a starting point, you mentioned that there was so much that you learned about operating businesses, and to a degree, I think you learned a lot about yourself through that journey as well. Can you, I guess, share what some of those specific learnings were that you took into Reload and subsequent businesses, and potentially what you look for in founders now?
Great question, Rohit. I think the number one thing is you never stop learning. And when I built Reload, I wanted to build a family business, as I said. I wanted to build a business that put family first, that you can work the 9 to 5. If you need to take a day off to go and do something with family, then do it. And I wanted to build a business model that wasn't always on. Building websites, you're doing them at 2 or 3 in the morning. And when I set up Reload, I wanted a business that you could actually make sustainable, and you could therefore attract and retain the very best staff. And when you attract and retain staff, that's probably another massive life lesson, that you always hire people that basically are way better than you at certain things that you're not good at. And we call it strengths and allowable weaknesses. And those allowable weaknesses are amazing in terms of just having that awareness, I suppose, that really helps you understand that if you can focus on the things that you're good at, which is for me, sales and growth and go to market, bring someone in that could actually do all of the technical piece or the CFO role or any of those other roles, then together with those very best A-graders, I call it, you can grow a great company. But it's understanding. It took me 7 years to work that out, by the way. It's not overnight. You've got to understand where your allowed weaknesses are. And that allowed me to really grow Reload very, very quickly.
So Lou, I guess another thing that I wanted to pick on was you mentioned very intentionally trying to build a family first business. I think, again, speaking to a lot of people close to you, know how important family is. I think having gone through the journey myself, speaking to a lot of founders, a lot of the reasons why we do this is because we want to be able to provide for our family and do those sort of things. But building those companies is often at odds with what we actually want to provide to our family, which is quality time and all of those sort of things. Again, any advice, having gone through that journey several times in terms of how you spoke about the business model and all of those sort of things, but any advice in terms of day-to-day operations or what you do to make sure that you find that right balance? And again, portfolio companies that you're speaking to in terms of how they should potentially think about that, or just any tips to founders that are listening?
Great question. And I think when we're choosing portfolio companies, we do exactly that. We get the insight into the behaviors of great founders that really prioritize their own wellness, their own mental health, first and foremost, but also their own lifestyle. I call it life-work balance, not work-life balance. And I think if you can go in with that mindset as a founder and approach it that way, you're building something generational and leaving a legacy for your own family. And I think that I really get attracted to founders that are doing it for those reasons. Some are doing it for altruistic reasons, but generally the ones that I really like and I know that will be more sustainable in the future will be ones that really doing this for building a legacy. And that's how I've done it in the past as well. Because I think to get out of bed every morning, to get up and keep swinging when you're a founder is vital. And that resilience and that stamina that you need to be doing it for a purpose. And so, yeah, I've adopted that for all of my businesses over the years. And every business, I've always made sure that the people that are joining it, both at the staff level, but also the management level, are actually aligned to that vision of building a legacy for them. One of those indicators early on, for example, has been around staff buying a house. And when staff buy a house, that means you've created opportunity as the founder and the owner of that business so that they're actually feeling comfortable to actually go and invest in a very expensive asset. But those sort of moments were some of the most proudest moments, not only employing people, but when they actually buy major assets and it's changing their lives. That's the greatest feeling ever.
Amazing. Yeah, I was about to ask, I mean, are there any, specifically when founders are pitching you and you, as you say, this is an important frame of reference or things that you look for when investing in founders, Are there particular signals, indicators, questions, or tests that you have for founders to gauge whether they are thinking about this from a generational perspective and like the broader reason why they're building that particular business?
Yeah, we at Sprint, we have a motto, build a better future. And we're trying to invest in founders that are generational founders that basically will be around longer than I'll be around. But they're actually importantly creating jobs and productivity and efficiency uplift for my kids and the kids of my kids, jobs for them. That's the way we look at it. It's about leaving that legacy in the future. And a lot of founders, when they come at the top of the funnel and apply through a website to venture capital firms like ours at Sprint, don't go deep enough into the true reasons why they're doing it. And a lot of founders, I'd say at least 90%, are doing it for the right reasons. They're not doing it for the money. I see that time and time again. And Rohit, you'd probably see it as well. We see that they're doing it. They could go and get a very well-paid job often, or they've mortgaged their house or cashed in their super, or they've done something where they've got their backs against the wall that they truly believe in it. I think founders fall down by not selling themselves about that legacy that they want to leave, that generational play that they're actually doing. And as investors, we spend a lot of time talking to them about that and pulling these key elements out. And I know from an investment committee view within Sprint, when I take up a deal to my investment committee, that's one of the first questions they ask is, why are you doing this and what legacy you're leaving, and how can Sprint be part of that legacy, and how can we help with the different forms of capital? So yeah, really, really important.
Yeah. And one other thing that you spoke about a little bit earlier was succession planning, finding people that are smarter than you and people that can build and grow. I think a really great example of that is Craig Somerville, who you worked with, who, to my understanding, started with your first business as a part-timer when he was at uni, and then ended up becoming your co-founder with your second business, Reload. Do you want to share a little bit about that story and that journey with Craig?
At my farewell speech, Rohit, for Reload, when I sold in 2022, and I went back a few months later and I met a lot of people that I actually didn't know. There was all these new staff there, and it was great to see. And I said, there's three really amazing turning points in my life. This is at this speech. The first one was getting married to my wife, Kerry. The second one was having 2 kids. And the third one was meeting Craig. And I think to build a 14-year company, to build a company that grew in some months at 100% month on month and then year on year, when SEO in the late noughties and into the 2010 to 2015 was taking off, you needed someone as your wingman, as your co-pilot that was always there. So Craig and I are 14 years apart. He applied for a marketing assistant in March 2008, and I was still building Reload as a consulting business because I had a couple of years restraint from selling Alfresco. On the 19th of May 2008 was my 2 years, and I could start doing digital again. And that was really, really important. And Craig and I started building under my house in Indooroopilly in Brisbane. And we were in a tiny little office, and Craig was 19 years old. And there was just something about him. And I thought, this guy is super smart. He's super driven. He's super cool. Like, he's really relaxed. But he can tell he wants to go global, and he wants to do something. And if I didn't grab him and hold him physically down with 2 hands and say, mate, let's go do business together, he would have gone off to a consulting firm. He would have gone off to one of the big 4. He would have been in Europe. He would have been in New York, in London. And I thought, we can't let this 1 in 1,000 people get away. And so I had an ulterior motive, and it worked out very, very well. By 2009, 2010, I offered him equity in the business, and that was in Auckland Harbour. Then we set up the UK, we set up India, we set up the Philippines, we set up New Zealand, and Craig led all of that. He was the guy on the planes, he was the guy managing the teams, he was the guy flying around because I had a young family. Again, back to that family practices, which really helped. And then 2015, he went to the UK and grew that company, that business over there. Within a year, he grew it at 160%. Came back to Brisbane, to the head office in 2016 and said, and we sat down and said, what are you doing? And I said, well, I would love to go and become an entrepreneur in residence at River City Labs and go and run a Mura D program with with everybody, and away I went. So he became the managing director, and he still is the managing director today of the whole global operation and doing exceptionally well.
Incredible story. Well, one story that he did tell me as well that he mentioned was your superpower was just your ability to extend trust and credibility to a lot of people. The story that he told me was when you pitched and won Subway, the Subway account, which is about 2 years into your journey. And he said the pitch was essentially you giving a 1 to 2 minute intro about yourself and your background, and then you just going, I'm going to hand over to Craig, who's the smartest person in this room. And he said, smartest person in this area. And, he said that it just made him feel 10 feet tall. And that was just one example of your ability to do that and extend trust. Again, how, as you mentioned, for you, Craig was one in a 1,000, 10,000 person that comes along. But it sounds like that's a very similar pathway that you found with each of your businesses of identifying 1 or 2 people to have that. How deliberate is that? And what is it that you look for in those people to develop and bring up to become the managing director or people that you can hand over the reins to?
Again, a great question. I think with people and leadership, I'm on a journey. And I'm pretty driven. I think you would have found, and people that know me go, yeah, you're very driven. It's the way I look at it is you're on a chariot and you've got the reins and the horses are going really fast, and people, it's a bit like Jim Collins says, on the bus or off the bus. You're on the chariot and the horse is bolted and you're hanging on with the reins, and you need people right next to you that can also hang on to the reins. And many people can't hang on to the reins. And that's perfectly fine. And they don't want to either. And that's perfectly fine as well. Again, that probably took me about 10 years to learn that not everybody is A, at the cadence that you can run at, and B, actually wants to do it. They might want to do other things, and that's perfectly normal. When you have your own first businesses, you're like, why doesn't everybody want to do exactly what I want to do and go at the same pace? In the last couple of businesses, Craig for Reload and then Georgia for Sprint, I've found people that just are at the cadence, they've got the same mission, and they know that Lew's not always going to be around because I'm an entrepreneur and I'll do my 10-year sprints, and therefore they would like to take over as managing partner, managing director. And that's exactly what's happened with both Reload and Georgia at Sprint. I think there's been a lot of people along the way that would tell you, if you interviewed them, that basically I run at a very fast pace. They just didn't want to be on that journey. They like me as a person and I like them as a person, but probably don't have a lot of time when you're trying to build and grow internationally, especially, that basically they'll self-select out. And that's absolutely fine. That's perfectly normal. But I do want to say, when you're building a great startup, building a generational company, you do need people around you very, very quickly. And it takes a lot, especially if there's tech founders out there or non-tech founders out there. To try and find a tech founder or a non-tech founder, you have to go through a number of iterations. And the final point there is someone like Craig is actually, sure, the yin and yang. My strengths, as I said, sales and marketing and go-to-market and growth. His strengths on paper are CFO, CEO, turnaround CEO, but he can actually cross over and do everything that I could do as well. And that's also the people that you're looking for. You're looking for people that aren't compartmentalized based on their background. So it's about the bias, of course, but also someone that can take over your role and actually step into what you're doing as well. They're truly the great founders.
We're going to take a very quick break from this podcast to talk about an important issue, which is the growth of your business. Specifically, how long sales cycles when selling to large enterprise customers can slow down progress for so many startups. Unfortunately, a portion of this is out of your control, but something you can do to accelerate your sales cycles and sell to bigger customers is to demonstrate your security compliance with standards like ISO 27001 or SOC 2. The problem is that achieving compliance can be a big distraction and a large financial and operational drain for your company. Thankfully, our partners for the show, Vanta, can help with this. Vanta automates up to 90% of compliance, getting you audit ready quickly and saving you up to 85% of associated costs. And Vanta scales with your business, helping you continuously monitor compliance, unify risk management, and streamline security reviews. There are over 7,000 fast-growing companies like Atlassian and Dovetail that use Vanta to build trust and prove security in real time. They've been supporters of the show for a while now and are doubling down in their support for our community by offering $1,000 US off their plans. To access this exclusive offer, head over to vanta.com/playbook. That's VANTA.com/playbook. All right, let's get back to this episode. And as you mentioned, part of growing really quickly is moving internationally. And you referenced this a little bit earlier. To my understanding, was it all in the same year that you expanded to the UK, New Zealand, and India?
Yeah, 2010 was a big year for us. Yep.
I can only imagine. I guess, again, what was the sort of catalyst to go from, prior to that being in Australia only, to then expanding out very deliberately into into 3 additional countries, sorry. And again, what did that process look like?
We always thought, and building a business in Australia, I always call it the 2% rule, where 2% of the global economy, approximately, depending on where we're up to. And I think that you can't, if you want to make a generational company, you can't just remain in Australia if you're in that particular industry. Now, you can build great companies here in Australia. You can do great revenue, but within tech and within digital, I think that it's really important to go overseas as soon as you can. There's two comments there. One is proving it to yourself that there is an amazing, huge world out there that has the same requirements of your business model from a product market fit. I call it market product fit, that basically allows you to scale internationally. And the second point is you can always come back and grow in Australia. And that's the way I looked at it. We could have gone to Sydney and Melbourne, set up a digital marketing agency office down there, but we're already servicing that beautifully from Brisbane. And our team was on the planes, and we were actually part of the trade shows, and we were doing all the things. We didn't need to go and set up costly infrastructure in those particular locations. So we thought, let's go overseas, because in 2010, I went over to the UK for a wedding and saw that they actually weren't that far ahead of us. And the best thing about digital and tech is that it's now, the new world order is budgets might be slightly larger, but really everybody's on the same plane when it comes to the latest innovation. And so we thought, you know what, I think the UK needs reload. And we set up over there. And also with New Zealand in Parnell, just in Auckland, we did the same. We set up in New Zealand because we thought the Kiwis are super creative. They do amazing ads and advertising, but digital marketing was really needed. And so, yeah, that's why we did it all in one. We just thought, while we've got the energy, while we're setting up new countries, let's just go and go and build those. So, yeah, it was early in the year in 2010 for New Zealand. Then it was mid-year for the UK, and then the latter part of 2010 into India.
And again, going back to something that you mentioned a little bit earlier in this conversation, was you're being very mindful and aware of both your strengths and weaknesses, and obviously hiring for people that plug in the gaps to your weaknesses. But obviously by doing that, it enables you to focus a lot more on your strengths. And again, as you mentioned, that for you was sales, marketing, go-to-market. In a prior conversation, I recall you mentioning a really interesting way that you were able to grow Reload from the start, which is by reaching out to some of your competitors with your previous business. Again, do you want to share a little bit about that sort of approach and tactic?
Yes, and there's now partner consultants like Hockey Stick Brian in Melbourne that actually consult on how to build great partnerships. We didn't have people like Brian around back in 2008. In 2008, I thought of pretty much what a partner strategist would do for you. And I think they're really important, by the way. What I did was built this partner strategy, and I called it an advanced handshake. It was like an agreement to all my old competitors. And I'd sold this web design agency, had my 2 years restraint. And I thought at the time, I'm not allowed to build websites anymore, because my wife was like, no more websites. You've been on that treadmill. You're off the treadmill now. And please don't build any more websites. And Craig agreed. Craig was a big supporter of not building websites. So I went and rang 10 of my old competitors and said, hey guys, I'm not actually building websites anymore. I'm doing this thing called SEO. And it was very, very new. No one was optimizing websites. And I said to them over coffee, literally it was over coffee, how about we have a one-page letter with an advanced handshake. It's literally like a handshake agreement. When you finish building a website, you send it to us. We'll SEO it, and we'll try and get them to the top of Google for you. And that was the coffee. That was the conversation. Within a year, that was 50% of our business referral. That was all my old competition saying, we trust you. You're not competing with us anymore because you're not building websites, but you're the only guy that's actually broken out and is doing this thing called SEO. We can't do that yet. It's before the days of digital agencies doing the whole thing. and we'll send all that work to you. And that really accelerated our hockey stick of growth. That really became our J curve because we just had a flood of opportunities come in and picked up some amazing logos, amazing businesses.
Incredible. Obviously, as you mentioned, you've been essentially doing this even with your prior business, so since 1999 or late 90s. What are some common mistakes that you see founders make when it comes to sales, marketing, partnership, growth? What advice would you have to founders, or what are, again, common mistakes that you see them making?
I think the number one mistake I see is not testing a market and doing enough research, not getting an understanding, a true deep understanding of what is the unique value proposition of what you're selling into them. And there's another technique that I used, which was test and learns, a bit like a multivariate test, that you need to do different test and learns, even down to how you sound and how you rate things when you go into a pitch and when you go into a sales meeting. And I think that you need to understand who the ideal customer is, who the quality customer is, who's actually going to pay you, not just an ideal customer, but someone that actually will give you money that you bank, because it's one thing picking up a customer, it's another thing actually getting the money in your bank. And I think the way to do that is it's not throwing everything, it's like mud sticking against a wall. It's actually being very strategic and working your way through a pathway and constantly refining your pitch, constantly leaving a meeting, even if you won or lost it, and saying, how could I do that better? How could I have said that one line better? How could I do the referral like Craig talked about? Maybe I'd made a mistake before that Subway pitch and tried to be Craig, and then realised that, I introduce who we are and why we're here. I'm going to hand it over to someone who's actually the latest expert in this. And I think that in a sales environment, you need to be constantly refining and learning, and that never changes. I think as the markets change and more competition comes in, and as you grow, you need to make sure your team's geared for that. And that's what we did. We built our sales team around that model. The other piece was prioritizing partnerships. In Australia, especially, in the UK as well, and New Zealand, we choose suppliers, no matter what industry we're in, based on relationships. And I think that we prioritize those relationships as the first and foremost go-to-market. And all the sales managers and the sales teams would organise golf days, we would organise road shows, would organise events that no other digital marketing agency was doing at the time. And I think that built relationships, that built the long-term trust, which you spoke about, and that built the opportunities then to actually go truly international and win global accounts.
Mm. The whole concept of building trust and relationships is something that's come up time and time again in conversations with you, but also a lot of people that know you really well as essentially a superpower of yours. As you mentioned, even the way that you do business is very led by relationships and trust and those sort of things built up over time. What are, again, I don't think that you would meet many people that would disagree with that, but I think it can be hard to understand how do you build that in practice. So, founders are told to build relationships with investors, you're told to build relationships with potential people in your industry. Again, do you have any advice or tips in terms of strategies that you've executed yourself that have worked, or things that you've seen that you think would be a good starting point for someone who's looking to get started in that area?
I think it's vital. I think it's vital for everybody. I think there's 2 points here. One is it takes time, and the second point is be patient. Be patient. Again, it's a bit like sales. You're selling yourself. You're selling your own connections. You're selling your own legacy. And I think what you need to do is make sure if something doesn't work, and often, Rohit, what doesn't work is someone trying to hit you up on LinkedIn saying, I know this person that might know that person, therefore let's have a coffee. And you need to understand how busy, especially general partners like myself in venture capital are, but also every other business is, everybody's busy, right? So you need to take time and have patience to build that up. And I think a key piece of that is, this is going back to Reload days. We had a whole strategy called Trusted Advisor. And you need to actually put yourself out there as a trusted advisor in the market. Kind of like you, Rohit, with what you're doing here with your podcast, that then creates other opportunities in different areas, but they're adjacencies. And I think when someone out there, like a founder, is trying to approach, for example, venture capital for investment, they need to understand that filling a form out on a website cold, or trying to approach a general partner via guessing an email or doing through LinkedIn may not get the cut through they're after. The number one advice that I can give is go to a trusted advisor that doesn't charge you anything, but someone that knows someone, that one degree of separation, and ask for an intro, but have a really good reason why you need the intro and have some background to it. I think that builds the trust and relationship. And I think it's not because people are not wanting to connect with you. I just think people are time poor. And I think understanding, the moments. I actually think time of year is important as well. We all know about once you hit mid-December through to mid-January in Australia, that's very difficult to get in front of people. And so there's windows as well to consider.
Yeah. I think something that I would add into working with a trusted advisor, which I totally agree with that point as well, but even with a trusted advisor, you still need to build trust and relationship with them for them to feel comfortable to make the intro as well. I think that one thing that I've found to be really useful is almost what you said about building those partnerships. It's working backwards to understand what is it that you're bringing to the table for the other person. So why is it that person is going to benefit from making the connection? And a lot of the time it's not necessarily anything financial, but it's more if they introduce a great company to a VC, that makes them look better and strengthens their relationship and those sort of things as well. And so if you work backwards and go, what would make this person excited to introduce me to that particular VC or that particular partner, it helps you be a little bit more specific with the story, but then obviously what it is that you're bringing to them as well versus, as you said, just reaching out on LinkedIn and expecting people to do that. It may happen, but it makes it a little bit difficult to cut through the noise.
It does. And I think with VC in particular, understanding two things is really important. So if you're raising and you're wanting to raise off VC, not everybody wants to raise off VC and they shouldn't raise off VC. There's two important things. One is the fund and understanding what they invest in. So the hot tip there is for Sprint, for example, go and check out our previous investments. And if you don't line up to them, maybe reach out and say, I don't line up. Would you consider an investment in X, Y, and Z? And the second thing is understand the fund life cycle. Is that VC at the early stage of investing or are they at the end and they're doing final check and deployment? Because if a fund is closed, there's no more deployment happening. And you might be a different sizing to what they're actually investing in. And I think understanding that, doing your research around that is really, really important because that's often the hard no that a lot of founders see from venture. It's not necessarily about whether they're an amazing founder, an A-grader, building a generational company that's got global market opportunity. Most of the time the VCs want to invest in it, but they actually can't because of mandate, fund timing, fund alignment. And there's other things in the background. And so, understanding that before you get the referral from a trusted advisor, I think is really important too. So you don't feel let down, but you might be there for the third fund, the next fund.
And obviously we've referenced it throughout this conversation, but obviously your main role at the moment is with Sprint Ventures. Do you want to share a little bit about Sprint Ventures and your focus areas? So
Sprint Ventures is an early stage company in investing at the moment out of our second fund into growth companies. So that's late stage seed and Series A. We've got 18 companies, soon to be 19. Very exciting. And we've got our first fund, which we set up in 2020. And that was early checks. That was those 200 to 300K checks into 15 companies. And there's a couple of companies starting to produce dividends and produce returns and things like that. So that's really exciting after a few years of patient capital to start to see the first fund success. And then we set up the second fund in 2021 and we're still deploying from that. That's going to be 8 to 12 companies. We'll probably get to about 10 investments in that company and we in that fund. And we built that fund so that we can invest in the follow-on funding. And I think in the early stage emerging fund manager market, like where Sprint is, there's a big gap in early stage checks coming out of accelerators and incubators. And then there's this sort of seed capital. And these are these $2 to $4 million rounds that we'll put in 750K a mil into that basically allow for true capitalization to go global. All the things I've been talking about, all of the things that I had the opportunities to do, we want to also do with breakout companies that are really growing. Because I think, we're investing in companies to actually take this into new and emerging markets. And then we're going to be raising a third fund, which is going to be backed in by QIC's Queensland Venture Capital Development Fund, the VCDF. And QIC put us through, we applied and we went through 9 months of due diligence. And we were lucky enough to be one of 10 that was awarded a sleeve of capital from the Queensland government to then go out and build a third fund. And the third fund will be everything the first fund and the second fund. 25 companies, early checks, and then also follow-on capital into late-stage seed and Series A. So we want to really support the next generation of amazing founders coming through. I believe there's a huge opportunity right now with founders in their second bedroom building amazing companies, whether it's in AI or healthcare or aged care, infrastructure, which is climate and water and productivity. I believe there's a massive opportunity because those founders are coming out. Some of them are appearing in accelerator programs now, but I think we're in another cycle. It's just tremendous. I've seen 2 of these cycles, early 2000s, after the GFC in 2010 and beyond, and I think we're about to go through another one. But we need more capital in Australia to be investing in these amazing companies to help them launch overseas. So that's why we do it. Being in VC is about being in patient capital, though. This is a labour of love. This is putting my own capital in and making sure that we're on a 10 to 15 year journey with these amazing founders.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the point about patient capital is really important, both from a founder's perspective, but also from a lot of people that may be new to investing in this space as well. I know for us, through Playbook Ventures, especially when we're doing deal-by-deal syndicates, we have a lot of angels that are interested in investing in tech, but maybe not have invested. And so one of the things that we really make sure that we're aligned on is what investing in this area generally looks like, especially the stage that we invest in, which is pre-seed. There's an even longer horizon on that. And so I think it's important on both sides to make sure that you have a very clear understanding of what it is that you're investing in and what the sort of return profile would look like as well.
Absolutely. And I think patient capital is also about expectation management, to your point. I think LPs and investors, limited partners and investors, there was a bit of frothiness in 2021, 22 with all the sort of the tech boom. And I think there was a lot of capital that was cycling through. We have conversations like that all the time, to your point, that this is about an allocation into a high risk but potentially high return. But this is certainly something that is not liquid. It doesn't produce a monthly check. So you need to cover, general advice only, you need to cover all bases with your financial advisors to make sure that you have a sleeve in everything. I think the best thing about VC, though, is truly active capital management. And active capital, which is different to sort of plonking a bit of cash into a managed fund that just produces something back to you. We rely on our LPs to actually help our portfolio companies. We want them to actually be on their boards and partnering with them, because a lot of our investors have the experience of setting up their own businesses, being very successful in their own industries, and we want them to be active managers alongside us. And I think that that's a really unique thing with Sprint as being a VC, but also that is vital because we need more hands on deck to help these amazing founders succeed.
Yeah, I think Australia still has a way to go in terms of being founder friendly when it comes to investment, but even just the landscape has changed significantly over the last 8 to 12 years in particular. And there's never been more sources of capital for founders to go through in terms of the number of funds that are out there. And so I think sometimes it's, from a founder's perspective, it's also difficult to understand that VCs are also operating business. And so from a VC's perspective, you're also looking for a point of difference of why is it that a founder in a very competitive round would choose us over others, especially, as you said, emerging funds. That's something we very consciously think about. But then also, as you mentioned on the fundraising as well, is something you and I have spoken about previously in terms of just the fundraising environment at the moment. I guess from your perspective, what are you seeing out in the market, and is there anything that you can share from a founder's perspective in terms of your read of what the market is like at the moment and what that might look like over the next 6 to 12 months?
I think the market is going through another change and cycle. I think it depends on the level investor that we're talking about. I think there's still, if you talk to Matt at Birchall and you talk to the crowdfunding platforms, there's still appetite for those 10K checks, those 20K checks. So I think the Brisbane Angels, the Melbourne Angels, the Sydney Angels still have checks coming in for opportunities. I think up in the other end, allocations into the large VC funds from institutional investors are large sleeves of capital. We've been told time and time again that up in that top end, institutional investors don't get out of bed. They don't actually do an allocation for anything under $50 million. So you need a fund of 100, 250, half a billion or a billion to actually be able to take institutional money. And that's very then difficult to deploy because you actually need to be always on and cutting some fairly large checks. And you've got to weigh that up with how much actual opportunity is in the Australian market if you're focusing on Australia under a ESVCLP, for example. In the middle ground, which is where we're all situated, which is family office investors, high net worth, wholesale, sophisticated investors, and that's the engine room, I would call it, of the investment within Australia. Those LPs, there's been a few that over the last 6 to 12, even 18, 24 months, may have done deal-by-deal investments and maybe have probably struggled a little bit to realise value from alternative investments such as venture capital. So they're a little more hesitant, I believe. However, having said that, if you're a good emerging fund manager and you can prove that you've actually got some runs on the board, the conversations are happening. And that's what we're finding right now, where actually it's with some family offices, it's actually easier, especially with the QIC backing, to actually close out that conversation to get an allocation from them for our third fund. So I think time will tell. I think 2024, the rest of it will be quite interesting and quite difficult, but I actually think that the main, I think it will really kick back off in 2025. We're starting to see at a macro level and a public markets level, those signals starting to happen with Guzman and Gomez in Australia. We're starting to see that IPO market open up a bit, and I think that will flow into early 2025. And so for yourself and Sprint, I think raising capital will be really kick off, I believe, in 2025. And so just a comment there, I think repeating that you actually need a bit of track record now. I think we actually, the LPs and the investors want to see some runs on the board. They want to see actually what's coming back in after 3 or 4 years, 4 or 5 years. And I think that's perfectly healthy.
You would have heard me say many times on this podcast before that I am such a big believer in surrounding yourself with the right people. And that's why I'm delighted to partner with Sender. Sender is the OG startup accounting firm in Australia, catering to all stages of your business life. If you're busy running your startup, you don't always have the time to balance your own books or do forecasts, and instead you can fully outsource your finance function to give you the time, energy, and resources that you need back to do what you do best, which is growing your business. They have a dedicated focus on founders, funders, and startups, and have an experienced team that can help you with everything from managing your tax to balancing your books to even helping with your exit strategy. I trust and use them with all of my businesses and can't recommend them highly enough. To find out more or to speak to Gareth and the team, head over to sender.com. That's SCENDAR.com. All right, let's get back to this episode. And I guess, as someone who has operated a couple of businesses before, primarily in the services space, I'd just be curious to know, what are some of the similarities in what you think makes a founder successful at running a services business versus a high growth business? And what are some of the differences? And how do you assess for that when looking at making potential investment decisions for Sprint?
That's a really good question. I think in some areas, there is a big disparity between a services business and a product-led business. But in Australia, it's about relationships, and you still need to build relationships and your brand to actually help grow your product business. Services, of course, are B2B or B2B2B, and they generally are about who you are as a human and the relationships and trust that we've talked about today that you've built up. You've still got to do that in a product-led business. You've still got to build up your brand. So what I look for, and this is going back, Rohit, to being an entrepreneur in residence 8 years ago, what we suggested at the time, if you're building a product-led business, build 2 brands. Build one for the product and the actual brand that you're taking to market, and build one for yourself. And so there was some really good founders that I had in accelerator programs that would actually get a marketing intern for the product business to build that brand on social media and traditional and all that sort of thing. And then also another marketing intern, a separate one, to build their own brand, do podcasts, run events, go to, all those sort of. And so I think there's a lot of similarities, but the truly great founders are ones that are already doing everything you do in a services business over adjacent to a product business. The other big thing that I love is market product fit, not product market fit. Everybody can do product market fit, and everybody can get out there and build the best iteration of a bit of kit. But the truly great product founders that you see are actually in market, testing and learning all the time, using those relationships like a services business, but actually building that wish list of change to actually then prioritize the features that actually are going to be the features that provide profit back to that business and ultimately alpha to a venture capital investor like us. So yeah, there are a couple of observations and the crossover, but yeah, there is a difference between services and product, but I think in Australia you can actually leverage both to really grow.
And I think, again, maybe pulling together a couple of different parts of this interview where you spoke about trust, relationships, building brand. I think one of the key things that you mentioned is that it takes time to build that. And I think from my perspective, the way that I have always been able to accelerate that is almost trying to build relationships by giving first and not really expecting anything for a long time. It is definitely playing the long game, but I've found that more often than not, that is something that's worked for me. But there is an inflection point. It's just, you never know how long that is going to take. I guess from your perspective, is there anything that you look for to show signal of trust between a relationship to be able to convert that into a sale, but be able to leverage that for something? Or
I know
again,
what you mean.
Anything that you look for? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really important question for a lot of people, because a lot of founders there, Rohit, what they do is they pay it forward a lot. Just like doing a podcast. You guys don't get paid for a podcast. You're putting out literally hundreds of episodes, and that is incredible, paying it forward. And I think what happens is everybody reads books and is told by mentors to pay it forward all the time. The 90% pay it forward and you'll make your money on the 10%. I think understanding where you cross over from the 90% to the 10%, you've still got to make money. You've got to put food on the table. You've got to provide for your staff. There comes a time where you need to say no. So I think different businesses are going to have different requirements here. But I would be saying that you need to get an understanding of when you actually need to bank the cash or the purchase order from a particular business. And maybe that's 3 strikes. A simple thing as, I'll pay it forward 3 times to that particular potential customer to build the trust, as we talked about. But if I don't get the response back, then it's probably an unlikely event. We do the same at Sprint. When we're asking for capital from LPs and investors, we have a certain pathway, and we don't want to annoy people because you actually can erode trust by bothering them too much. But we're paying it forward a lot. We're putting on a lot of events, a lot of webinars, a lot of information, a lot of free information about what venture is and how private equity works and all those sort of things. But there comes a time where you actually have to say, right, this is the end of the line. I do actually need to get a check from you, or I need to put my energies into something else. The term I've heard before is there's 3 answers to everything. The best answer is yes. The second best answer is no. And the worst answer is maybe.
Love that. Maybe just a final thing on that is that my bit of advice in building those relationships would be, I think a lot of founders tend to go very broad with that, and they try and build, there's a lot of surface level relationships across a very large group of people versus focusing on depth of those relationships. And I think that a lot of the time, if you focus on depth, you can get a lot further. And then there are ways of being able to leverage those relationships to almost act as a honeypot to attract other people, which I think is, again, I've just found to work a lot more effectively, and in some ways is a lot quicker than trying to be everything to everyone, spreading yourself too thin and never getting to the point where you've actually built enough trust with someone to be able to do something with, let alone being able to leverage that for something further.
Totally agree with that. Yeah, that's go deep rather than go wide, and be prepared to say no. Sorry, I can't keep going. I think that's one lesson that I've learned in sales and approaching people over the years is you also have to understand that it's reciprocal. You actually have to learn how to say no. And that's often the hardest thing. When you're trying to build trust, it's the reverse of what you want to try and do.
Yeah, 100%. Llew, I can speak to you for hours, but I know that you have another meeting to get to, so appreciate your time. But for anyone that wants to find out more, say hello, get in touch, what's the best way for them to do that?
The best way is LinkedIn. Search on Llew Jury on LinkedIn, LLEWJURY. And generally, it might take me a little bit of time to come back to you, but if you drop me a message, I'm always happy to try and hook you up with someone and link you in or give you some advice somewhere. So yeah, LinkedIn.
Yeah, or even better, find a trusted advisor to come.
Find a trusted advisor to do and do that three-way link in. That's always really positive. So
amazing, Llew. Once again, thank you so much for your time and for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure.
Pleasure. Thank you very much. Cheers.
Thanks for listening to episode 193 of the Startup Playbook podcast. As always, full show notes from this interview will be available at startupplaybook.co. I'll be back next week with another episode, but in the meantime, if you enjoyed this interview, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. As always, thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you next week.